welcome to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I am Councillor Marie-Therese Rossi and I am the chair of this committee. The meeting is also being streamed live on YouTube, and members of the public and media are welcome to watch and listen to the discussions taking place, and I would like to welcome them as well. I think we will start with 72 seconds of silence to remember those who lost their lives in the Grenfell tragedy. Thank you. Before we proceed with the meeting, I would ask members of the committee and anyone who's speaking to just switch on their microphones when they are called and then to switch them off afterwards. We will be maintaining social distancing during the meeting and wearing masks when moving about the chamber. If a councillor wishes to speak and I haven't called them, please raise their hand. We have a full agenda for this evening, and this includes our continuation of the Scrutiny flood risk management. And so included in the agenda is a written update from Thames Water. And we agreed at our October meeting they would provide us with this, and we'll come to a subsequent meeting to answer our questions again. So apologies for absence. I have Councillor Beryl-Cox. Do any members have any interest to declare? No? I will take the minutes later, so we will go straight on to the flood risk management. So the written update from Thames Water includes an update on the things that we discussed at our meeting on the 11th of October, and also a copy of the internal review that they have carried out. This is a separate thing to the independent review, which has now commenced. So the reason we've got these on our agenda tonight is for us to, councillors and members of the public, to ask whether we have got satisfactory answers to the questions we asked in October, and also if we have any other questions that we need to be raised at this time. I have invited Councillor Johnny Thalasitis to the meeting, as he is the lead member for flood risk management, as well as Jonathan Wade, who is the head of spatial planning. So we'll go first to members of the public, and I call on Amanda Frame, who would like to make a short speech. Thank you.
Good evening. In 2007, my home on St. James's Gardens was flooded. That force was so strong, a fully loaded large refrigerator was thrown off by the force of over a meter of foul sewer water rushing into my lower ground floor and my kitchen. 6 months later, in a very expensive refurbishment, one of the first flips was installed in my home. The July flood of last year did not flood my house. Over the next years, there was a flow group set up, often worked with, we had a working group with Ofwat and Thames Water. In late 2008, Ofwat confirmed, and I'm going to quote from an email sent to me, and I have it with me, and I can share it with you if you want it, that Ofwat and Tim had finally, quote, outlined their views of the causes of the flood and their view on possible solutions. And it was clear that a catchment-wide solution would be needed, as there would be limited benefits in property-specific solutions or work to provide storage in local sewers. A new relief sewer was a likely solution, and more work would be needed to establish a workable scheme. The result, finally, in December 2014, was the promise of the Counters Creek Sewer Alleviation Scheme. Unbeknownst to us, that working group, behind the scenes, Thames Water, Ofwat, and RBKC were developing another scheme, which would not include a sewer. This was to have holding tanks on Addison Crescent and Holland Greens, and some within Hammersmith and Fulham along St. Anne's Road. That was 2015. None of those proposals have progressed. Then, shock. In December 2019, it was announced in the PR19 final determination, Thames Water Outcome Performance Commitments Annex by Ofwat, that the flood alleviation, well, one of the last bullets of their many points was, we make the $150 million downward adjustment to the RCV in relation to its Counters Creek sewer flooding program, which we consider to be counseled to fully compensate customers in the Thames Water failure to deliver this program in 2015 by 2020. Let's cut to the chase. Thames Water was not going to construct that sewer, but instead it would now be required to do a number of commitments and promises to provide a full report no later than July 2023, which set out its understanding of the risk of the catchment and outline its long-term strategy for alleviating the flooding in the area. During this period of time, Thames Water was to monitor and report the following. This is a few lists of things they were supposed to be doing. Understanding the risk of flood and the level of resilience within Counters Creek catchment. Clearance of blockage. They seem to think they don't have that responsibility, but it's listed here. Sewer pumping stations availability and management. Surface water management. Risk sewer flooding and risk of sewer flooding in a storm, and internal sewer flooding. Those were reports that were required in that document by Ofwat to be presented yearly. Has anyone ever seen one of those reports? An interesting point, which in 2015, RBKC's report to Thames Water, is the recognition of a nearby strategic development in the Counters Creek area, such as White City and Old Oak Commons, should be taken into consideration when considering and calculating the infrastructure needed to address both the increase of foul flows and the surface water runoff. We now have the proposals for possibly 5,000 homes in Kinsale, a massive 100 West Cromwell Road building, and of course, Earl's Court. None of these are mentioned by Thames Water ever. Thames Water has now assigned their own consultants to review this last flood. But why are they not reviewing the monitoring reports required in the PR19? Who in Kensington and RBKC is chasing for this information? In reading the letter from the new CEO, which was presented here, you've got it, the committee report and their internal review of November 2021, they are more interested in blaming the call centers and saying those will be improved than actually reporting and taking action to stop floods. This is a case of whitewashing by the gamekeeper and the poacher. And then 13 years later, they're still whistling in the wind while we flood. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. I'm just going to make a couple of observations. So we will look into those issues that you've brought up tonight. I was not aware of a separate scheme being talked about with the Council and Thames Water of holding the water in some way in 2015. I was not aware of it, and I haven't read the document that you have there. But my understanding is that as a result of the floods in 2007, that a lot of work was done with Ofwat and Thames Water, and a plan, the Counters Creek alleviation scheme was thought up, and this was meant to address the problems, and this had progressed quite far to, almost pre-planning stage. And then in January 2018, Thames Water announced that we might be a little bit surprised, but they weren't going ahead with it. So, I mean, that is a question that I have put to Thames Water, and I will put again, because I think that is a very important question, to know exactly, A, why that it didn't happen, and B, what difference would it have made if we did have it. Amanda?
Sorry. There's the first, the 2007 and 2008, 2007 flood and the 2008 flood alleviation sewer recommendation. Then, in 2014, they suddenly decided that they were actually, no, it was 2015, they were going to look at holding tanks. So between them counseling, and actually those holding tanks are the ones that didn't progress to planning. Actually, John Wade could tell you exactly what happened there. But there are two things there.
All I can say is from memory, I don't remember that at all. I remember a lot of talking about the Counters Creek alleviation scheme. At the time, I was actually the chair of Public Realm, and I don't remember, I will look into it, but I do not remember any separate negotiation about a holding scheme for water. I just remember that the 4 sites had been identified, and that certainly that the shafts would have to go up, and some of the residents weren't happy about it, and where it could be done, and it was going to be done near to Cardinal Thorne's school, and could it be done in the holidays. I remember all of that, and I will look into what you have raised about the holding tanks, but I don't remember it. But I think that for me the real issue is not pursuing the not pursuing making the, enlarging the sewer. That to me seems to be the main issue.
But yes and no. That's hugely important. And whether they're referring to the reasons that, I'm not so interested in why they didn't do it. I'm interested in why they recommended doing it in the first place, and then maybe why they didn't. But what about all the reports they were supposed to be doing? All these things that are in PR 19, which Ofwat required them to do, every single one of them. I mean, you look at these and you think, they're required to produce document after document after document. Where are those? Where is the document on clearing the blockages? That should be reported yearly. Where is the report on the sewer pumping stations availability? Where's the report on the surface water management? Where are these? They're required by Ofwat. Have they been done? And if they were done, they may inform the poacher and the gamekeeper in their final decision and report. But that's important information that they were required to have. Where is it?
Okay, we will look into that, Amanda. Are there any other members of the public who would like to speak or to ask questions? The gentleman there, and then Elio. Could you take your Ross.
Hello. Yeah. Music to my ears that they're supposed to report on the pumping stations, as we think Lots Road pumping station failed in July. So I'd be very interested to follow up on that. Also, whilst it's easy to talk about big schemes, I do believe local issues can be dealt with locally as well in the interim period. So I think that idea of holding tanks, which can be done much more quickly than a brand new sewer, should also be progressed in tandem. They're not separate. Matt is absolutely right. They're not separate. They're complementary. They have different timescales. One's more of an emergency measure and one's more of a long-term measure to allow for growth of the city.
Okay, thank you. And we have already asked Thames Water about the Lots Road pumping station, and we'll ask them again. Elio, if you'd like to speak.
We heard on the 11th of October from the guy sitting there, because I was here last time, and he's an engineer, and the lever manual hadn't been pulled. It was pulled at 5 o'clock that night. Hence the rapid disappearance of the water once it was leaving. Why on earth isn't it automated? And secondly, I think this holding tank thing would be vital, because we were told in the last meeting that it would be over 10 years from beginning to end if we did do a Countess Creek set up, 10 years. So in the interim, there could easily be the same type of flood, given the climate change and everything else. So why not do holding tanks? I know it's money out, but it might be a form of security. And thirdly, if I may, you say the Thames Water has done a report, their findings. Is there any chance that we, members of the public, could look at it, see it? Not now.
Sorry, it should be in the papers at the back.
I didn't get given any papers, so I'm just talking off my head.
Yes.
I don't want the whole caboodle, but can at some point I keep or have the bits that are relevant for the Thames Water thing? Thanks.
Yeah, that's fine. So, I mean, the report they've given us that's printed in the papers is their own internal look into what went wrong, et cetera, and then there is the separate independent review, which is, I think, a more scientific exercise, I believe. So, I will now... Do any other members of the public wish to say anything?
Thames Water on holding tanks. In the shorter term, I know that.
Yeah, okay, I've got that down. So if no one else wishes to speak, I'm going to ask Johnny Thalasitis if he would like to say something about...
Sure. Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to speak tonight and to address the committee and the residents who are here. Not only as the lead member, but also as a councillor in Holland Ward, I'm acutely aware of the impact the flooding had last year. I have constituents who I speak to regularly who still haven't moved back into their properties, and so I know that it's profoundly affected lots of my constituents. I certainly think there have been a lot of valid points raised already by the Chairman of the Kensington Society and the other residents who are here as well. And the only thing I wanted to add to that was a slightly more basic one, actually. One of the key lessons learned in the report we've been presented is about communication with external stakeholders and elected members. And I note that Thames Water have failed to provide a representative tonight to come and speak to the committee, and I think that's a fact of profound...
They weren't, we didn't ask them, Johnny.
But I think it would have been very helpful to have them here, because I think we need to continue the dialogue.
I think, well, thank you for your input, but I mean, that we didn't advertise the meeting as that. And what we had decided is that we would get a written update, and then later on would invite them back again. But it's not fair to say they haven't presented anyone, because they were not asked to come. They were asked to provide a written explanation for this meeting, and then to have another meeting later on where they would come and take questions again.
Okay.
All right, okay. Jonathan Wade, do you have anything that you would like to say about, you might know something about the planning process for the sewer and etc.?
Well, obviously we're looking at the whole flood mitigation measures at the moment. Clearly we're close to publishing a draft new local plan, and we will make sure that the policies we have on things like SUDs are as good as they can be. I think at the moment, clearly we're awaiting our Section 19 report, which clearly the covering report makes clear. Thames Water have also got to report as well, and I have attended pan-London sessions with London councils and the GLA, so we're not the only London authority that's pushing Thames Water very hard to actually investigate what actually did happen and what mitigation measures can be put in place. I think there's a couple of things that would be useful to have. Clearly, the flip device and how that actually works and whether that actually has any other effect on any other property is something that I think would be useful for Thames Water to clarify. And I take Ms Frame's comments and we'll look into those. I think certainly the scale of development, particularly to the west of us, in Hammersmith and Fulham, with White City, with Kensal, we have asked Thames Water about whether they do have the mitigation measures to deal with substantial development that will happen and to ensure that actually doesn't have any further burden on the existing sewerage network. So they are aware of that, but I think perhaps that's where the holding tank idea may have originated from as well. But certainly we can take that back to Thames Water for some clarification on those points.
Okay, thank you. Elio.
Are Thames Water bound to make public their findings and their report?
The independent review, yes, I'm sure they are.
But the actual Thames Water people, though, that's not the same thing as independent review, is it? I thought it were two things, Thames Water's own findings and independent reviews.
Well,
I just wondered.
the report we have got in here is in the public domain because they've given it to us.
But is there another one that Thames Water are doing findings?
Not as far as I am aware.
Okay.
They might be, but I
Yeah.
don't know that. Okay. So I think I will now turn to the committee and see if they have anything to raise or to add. David.
A couple of my residents have made the point that they are surprised that there is no scope for input either from councillors or from residents.
I think
And I absolutely concede that the independent review is being done by professional engineers, and I'm not aware that there's anyone on the council who is a hydraulic engineer, but I wonder whether it might be possible for us to ask if we could at the very least be called for evidence on a couple of occasions, and including residents, so that we can put forward from a council perspective our perspective, from a resident's perspective their perspective, but also make sure that all the questions that have been or will have been put to the independent review are answered, and that if we could possibly have a review of it before it's finalised so that there are no inaccuracies, I think that would be remarkable, go a long way to assuage the concerns of not just my residents, but I'm sure of many other wards too who've been flooded, that this is not going to be a whitewash.
Okay, so as a result of this meeting, we will write to Thames Water again. I think we also need to write to Ofwat again, and we will make that request that you can meet with them.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Okay. Councillor Pascal.
Thank you, Chairman. Sorry, I'm about halfway between two microphones. One of the concerns that I've got is that in the briefing that we have, at the beginning of the paper tonight, there is an implication that we've got no authority to ask for any, or the council has no powers to require any parties to do any work apart from within the council. And that plays into also a concern that whilst individual parts are trying to do of the flood responsibility, be it Ofwat, be it Thames Water, be it ourselves, be it London councils, be it the central government, everybody's looking at this from a different point of view, but not strategically and not in a joined up way. Now, when water comes out of the sky, it doesn't discriminate between organisations and structures and legal responsibilities and so on. It basically just falls where it lands, and then it finds the easiest way out through sewers, over the ground, into the river. So what I'm wondering is can we ask the question, and I'm not even sure this is just to Thames Water, maybe it's to Ofwat as well, and to London councils, is as to who has the responsibility for overseeing the overall design of the system to take away the water that falls from the sky. And effectively, it has to look at the whole system. In the end, we want the water to go into, not the Thames itself, but into the new Thames sewer when it's complete. Because that is supposed to be the answer strategically for London and so on. And then if you work backwards via the pumping station where we hear that a lever may or may not have been pushed on the night in the correct way, and I share your issue with the fact that it's not automated, I do have a slight caveat in the sense that automated systems can go wrong as well, so there needs to be a check on that. But there are ways and means managerially and electronically. So going back up the system, it isn't just a question of once in a 30-year or once in a 200-year storm. I mean, they will need to take advice from their experts and Met Office and all the people dealing with climate change, etc. It's not just a question of looking at overall. It's no good if the main trunk sewer is big enough and the branch sewers are not. And it's no good if the branch sewer has the capacity if you can't get the water off your premise into the sewer. And you may need a non-return valve, you may need a flip, you may need to clean your drains, you may need to have new drains, there may be all sorts of things that as a property owner you need to do. But unless we look at this as a system overall and then say where is it weak, where does it not have resilience, and into that system where do we need to build capacity or hysteresis, if you use a different engineering analysis, to slow up certain things. And that can be SUDs, it can be holding tanks, it can be planting, it can be permeable paving, etc., which impinge on our planning system and the way we manage our properties and so on. Okay. But unless there's some overall design for the system, it's going to fail at times and in parts. And it's not good enough for any one part, particularly Thames Water in this instance, to say, we believe these are the criteria that we should be measured by. We're responsible to Ofwat by those. Tick box, tick box, tick box. Oh, whoops, we failed on that, and we're going to put in a mitigator matter for that. That's not the way that we're going to have a successful future. So I think we should be calling for a root and branch review of the design of the system, the criteria that Ofwat set to Thames Water, and the Thames Water should be measured against that. And then our responsibilities as a council should be set out as well, and a responsibility for us as property owners, those who own properties, or our landlords could be laid down as well. So there's a clear division of responsibility. Unless we have that, we're not going to have a solution.
Okay, so I'm going to pass that on to Johnny, if you would like to answer that, or Jonathan Wade, about where the responsibility lies, I think, within the council, and then also what powers have we got of oversight of how Thames Water and Ofwat actually, how they behave and how they conduct themselves.
Well, with regard to the Section 19 reports, it's made quite clear in the legislative framework that we can't make someone do something. We can only report on it and make recommendations. So I think that's clear across the country, because I've looked at other ones where the same, where recommendations have been made. So we can't statutorily oblige them to do that. Clearly Ofwat are the formal scrutiny body for Thames Water. So I think if you want further investigation of Thames Water to make them do things, it's really Ofwat that we need to approach. As I've said, I have attended meetings, but they've been done on a more informal basis about looking at the pan-London effect, because it affected obviously a number of London boroughs, not just ours. And they are coordinating, Thames Water are coordinating across London a response to London councils and the GLA about what happened across London. I mean, clearly we're drilling down in our borough. I think really all I can say is that if we wanted to try and ensure that Thames Water perhaps do more than they have to do in terms of recommendations, then I think we would have to, as a council, approach Ofwat on that and say that actually we feel that they should have the power to push Thames Water harder than they do and take a more strategic and holistic approach to this problem. I suspect then they will say, well, our powers are set by Parliament and that would need a change in legislation. That's what I suspect would be the answer back.
Okay. And Johnny, as the lead flood member, got anything to add? Okay, thank you. Greg?
Thanks. Just looking ahead to one or two things that we might do next. The independent review, I think we gleaned last time, but it wasn't absolutely clear that they were going to review by the end of April. It wasn't at all clear, but that was probably the best estimate we managed to get out of them at the meeting last time. And I wonder if we as a committee can invite, or our successors to invite the independent review to come and brief their findings to us early in the new council term in a midsummer, sort of June meeting. I would also, maybe at that meeting or another one, like to invite Thames Water to, well, obviously they've got to present to us again, but they've done this internal report in November, and it's got rather a lot of actions listed in it, some of which they say are completed and some of which are ongoing. I'd quite like to see a new version of the report saying how far they got with the actions that they say are underway, because I don't want this to drift. I think that they need to be held to account, and that would be one way of doing it.
So yeah, well, I mean, we can certainly, and we will invite Thames Water to a meeting. I'm not sure that having the people from the independent review at the same time would necessarily be the best idea.
No.
And as far as, I mean, going from Felicity's meeting, it seemed to me that the timetable had already slipped. And, you know, so I can't say if it's going to be in April or in May.
So when I mean, the exact time, it will finish at some point, and when it does finish, I think we ought to, or our successors ought to invite the independent review. And I think it's sensible to say a separate meeting to the one that Thames Water are presenting.
And I think, yeah, we need to have Thames Water in before then, actually, if we can.
Absolutely agreed.
Yep. So I'll have Kazim and then Janet.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I wish to thank residents who are here, Manda, the chair of the Kensington Society, and other residents who are here to talk about this issue. Flooding, I think, Madam Chair, is an issue that has been talked about as one is in a generation, but it's not one is in a generation now. It's coming back 2007, 2008, and 9, and a few years in the middle, and now we had a 2021. I would suggest this matter is no longer an issue that is just one-off, and we need to look more deeper into the reports and what's been happening, and specifically from my angle, the impact that it had, the livelihood, and the people who are living within their properties, and the people who have moved out of properties, and at this moment still are in temporary accommodations. And I said in the last meeting, we had one meeting before this one, on the 11th of October. I would suggest, similar to what I have said before, we should look into this issue into more details, and overall this committee will have the overall leadership. Having said that, I would say housing should be housing and communities committee should be playing a role here, and to meet residents whose homes have been affected, to actually know more details about it, and have a meeting separately from this meeting, as well as I'm sure Councillor Will Pascal will do for the environment. So this should be breaking down into more smaller meetings where they can have an impact of their homes and what has happened, and we can have more detailed rather than meeting one-off or twice a year about this flooding issue. It's not a one-off, it's got to be continued, and hopefully, as Council has mentioned, this could be part of a work program for next year's Council agenda for any scrutiny. But this should be continuing, and more into the housing, as well as environment team should be looking into it rather than just one committee. That's what I would like to see in the next few
And I
months.
think that's right. I think we have to keep a constant view on this and keep contacting Thames Water and also Ofwat, I think, again.
That's exactly when we can hear from the residents directly, rather than waiting for reports to be done where they're not involved that much. So I think that smaller meetings, whether it's the housing and communities or the environment, will give impact to this, and then we can all report back to this committee. I think that will be the way forward, rather than one big meeting and then nothing happens after that.
Janet.
Good evening. I thank you to all of you for sharing with us. I feel really sorry for what you've been going through. I think we need clarification about the role of Ofwat. It says here in the report that they are the sector's economic regulator. I don't know what that means exactly, and I don't know how that would be appropriate here. Are they adequate for reviewing this situation? I mean, where is their input?
Thank you, Janet. And I think that is something that I've kind of picked up in between the meetings, is that we did invite Ofwat to the meeting on the 11th of October, and they actually sat there very quietly, and they didn't really say very much. And I think it's right what Jonathan Wade has said, that really now we do have to obviously write to Thames Water again, but I think we should be pushing much harder on Ofwat to do their job and to regulate Thames Water, because they're obviously failing as well. So, Councillor Addenbrooke.
Thank you, Chair. Just going back to the review which they sent through, which all sounds lovely, one of the questions we had was how are they engaging with the digitally excluded? And I really do feel they've missed the point when they say, have posted an online link to the questionnaire more prominently on our website. So I think, could we go back to them and ask them how they are engaging with the digitally excluded? They also talk about customer service. And I know a number of residents in my ward have been talking to Thames Water or trying to talk to them. And some have been assured that they probably should have flips, and they've been given reference numbers. They call, they get cut off, they're told their reference number is no longer valid, they're given a different reference number. Then they're told that Thames Water will call them back, and they don't, and they are fed up. There is no customer service at all, and I think that's something that they need to address, because they clearly haven't. Thank you.
Agree, and I think that one of the reasons, the things that I thought they might have been able to sort out since October, is actually replying to letters from residents, and we have actually chased that up again this week. And what we did in the October meeting was we allowed everyone who was in the meeting could give their names and addresses and their problems, whatever, and they were passed on to Thames Water. And Thames Water will then have to go back to them individually, not to us, and that should have happened. So I think one of the things of the value of having a written review, I mean, that is something they could have sorted out by now, and I am not convinced that they have. As far as the science of it and, the engineering of it, maybe they do need to take time and do it in a thorough and proper way, but how they actually deal with their customers, they should have sorted that out by now. Thank you, Sarah. Well,
Could I add a point to that, and maybe it's a question to our Chief Executive, Murray Quirk, that we have, as I understand it, a mechanism for dealing with disasters or major risks that arise through a system called GOLD. And is there any connection between the borough and Thames Water on that system? Because on the night, one of the issues was nobody could reach anybody to work out what to do, and the borough took a lot of initiative, and Thames Water weren't seen.
No, there isn't. There are arrangements in relation to the water providers and Ofwat, but they're not in the sense there isn't a tight system that connects with the civil contingencies, which is the thing which governs critical responses. So on the night concern, most of the challenges that we had were actually with housing associations, because we couldn't get connection with them. But you're right, this is an issue.
Because maybe they could have actually told us a bit about what was going on if their systems were, which they obviously aren't, but if they were up to scratch, they could tell us something as it emerges.
Yeah, I think there's the issue about whether their systems are adequate to meet what are day-to-day pressures or week-to-week or month-to-month, and then whether they have the capability of responding to crises events like that particular flood.
Thank you.
I'll take Elliot now.
Pick up on Councillor Addenbrook's point about Thames Water's response rate. Well, on the 11th of October, George Mayhew sat there and was profusely apologetic. He mentioned this many, many times to all of those of you who came that night. And he certainly said, we will make direct contact with those who contact us. So I did exactly what you mentioned. Been in touch, everything else. Nothing at all. And I was extremely badly affected, and I haven't, 6 months later, moved back into my flat yet. So I'm afraid that's a personal member of the public should write to you.
No, so that is very disappointing and should not have happened, and we will take that up with them. David?
All I want to say is Elio is absolutely correct, but actually there are a number of other people in Norland who also are complaining they haven't had anything from Thames Water. So I want to say that sympathise greatly with Elio as I do. Actually, it's a far more widespread problem than just her,
I think it's
unfortunately.
everybody, probably.
And therefore, our issue is not just to complain to Thames Water on behalf of them, it's to work with other authorities, residents of whom have also been affected, so that we have a collective impetus against them.
And I think it's very disappointing that they have not sorted it out. They've had enough time since the 11th of October to get people in to answer letters, and there's no excuse.
Specifically on that questionnaire, which after a lot of badgering that night, up came the contact, but my God, did it need a lot of comment. They said they would certainly be doing something for those who weren't digitally connected.
And so what I'm getting now from the committee and from the residents is that, you know, what the question we have to answer is their interim review of themselves good enough? And the answer is it isn't. And they haven't done what they said they were going to do. And we will go back to them. And we will make them come in next time and speak to residents. Marwan.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Chair. And thanks for our residents raising their concern with us. I don't want to elaborate too much here, but it's an acknowledged that in their internal review, especially regarding engaging with the different stakeholders, that's not enough. And in Nottingdale, for example, in my ward, the whole 2 streets really turned into a river. And we tried on the night where I've seen the chief executive, our leader of the council, almost around midnight, we tried just to communicate with the housing associations where, reaching out in communication in the initial stages is critical. And I don't see here there is a priority arrangement in the lesson learned. So, Madam Chair, I think, I support you that we need to ask if they can provide a quantifiable and a priority action list so we can really measure the responses and how effectively these measures is going to be put in place. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, I mean, you know, an organisation can fail in many different ways, but not actually being able to answer emails and letters is a very, to me, very fundamental failure. And that's something that they should have sorted out by now. I mean, I think preventing flooding is a much more difficult question, but they should be able to at least contact their residents when they've promised to. So, Do we have any other comments or questions? Yeah.
Want to belittle this, but I think we're being incredibly polite and reserved. A friend of mine reported what was on television in the Thames Valley near Oxford yesterday, which was a demonstration of local people with banners that said basically we want birds and not turds. And I mean, there's this, at the moment, I think that Thames Water is not taking this seriously, and to take the point that was made in the front here, that we should be joining together with other councils, not just those in London, but on the whole of the Thames Valley area where Thames Water operate. And the same gentleman who got up and was very pleasant from Thames Water, who got up and was very pleasant to all of us a few weeks ago, was on the television saying more or less the same thing. We'll be in touch, we'll deal with it, we'll do all the right stuff. And he's obviously paid quite well to, smooth things over. So I think we do need to be pithy and strategic and work with others.
Thank you, Will. So we are encouraging direct action, are we?
Well, I'm not suggesting that in this borough we put up placards of that nature.
Okay, I'll call in Amanda and then I'll bring this item to a close.
Thank you. I want to make several points. One is that working group that we had in 2007, 2008, that continued on to about 2014, included residents. Why can't they now? What are they afraid of? The other thing is they continue to talk about the Lots Road pumping station and how they have this mechanism to have somebody be alerted. Well, where is that person when the alert comes in? How long does it take that person to get there to push the button to turn it on? I mean, everything about the mechanism on Lots Road needs to be investigated and looked at. The other thing is they say that they talk about the Met reporting of a yellow flood, and then it turned amber during the flood. The interesting thing is, and I can't find my notes, but I will try to remember. On the 13th of July, there was a high tide. On the 25th of July, there was a high tide. High tides mean that Lots Road can't pump into the Thames. Don't they know this? Do they have any coordination with the Thames and what the Thames, what the Thames's problem creates with Lots Road? And the whole mechanism, we need to demand, because that seems to be one of the things that everybody says, as soon as it turned on, it went away. It may have been actually the tide dropped down. What is it? All these things. The Somerset floods that happened, and actually, oddly enough, about like the time when Thames Water was able to repay them and was able to fund the money back to Ofwat, that was completely controlled by the Environment Agency, not by a water board, but by the Environment Agency. They have set up levels all the way across it that are automated flood alleviation machines that turn on automatically. They aren't flooding anymore. Not enough is being done here. There are solutions. We need to demand them. And a call center is not our solution. A flood alleviation system is our solution.
Okay, thank you, Amanda.
Thank you.
So I'll say this, what we could do is you had a working group. We can't join the independent review because we're not hydraulic engineers, but we could form a working group here and now of councillors and residents in this council, if people want to do that. Jackie, we could do that? Have we got enough capacity to do that?
Yeah, if that's what the committee wants to do, we can do that.
If that's what people want to do, we could do that. What we certainly will do is we will write again to Thames Water, and we will also write again to Ofwat, because I think Ofwat has really got to be put on the spot now as well. But if people would like to have a working group, Amanda, we can set one up. Cousin?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think working group is a right approach for this issue. Having said that, we can also have another option, which I've suggested earlier, for the housing and communities to look into the more details into this issue, as well as the environmental team can look into the committee. But I would like to know what the residents are thinking. Would you prefer the committee, a working group committee, both from the housing and the flooding, for environmental team together, and the planning as well, or would you prefer a working group on its own on this issue? Because this cannot be done on just one meeting every 3 months. It has to be an ongoing issue, and to make sure that the residents are heard and local solutions are found for the local problems, not the wider Greater London problems. I think we need to know from what you think, and then we can act accordingly, whether you prefer working group or the housing and communities can look into specifically, because the impact is housing, it's where you live, and I think that's where we're coming in.
I'm sorry, schools, hospitals, underground stations were affected, not just housing.
Can I say, so if we have a working group, it could be under this committee, which would be generally, or it could be under environment, or it could be with housing, but it would seem to me that maybe, I mean,
Could I make a suggestion? I think that if we start splitting it up at this stage, we're splitting the problem up again. I think what's very important is that this Overview and Scrutiny Committee, if it wishes to set up a working group and invite residents to join that working group, and Jackie will tell us if there are any governance issues on that, but I think under a working group we can be very flexible and we don't have to have strict sort of governance arrangements. What would be very important, not only to address the immediate issues, but I think we should have somebody to come in and explain the hydrology of this to us, because otherwise we're casting around as amateurs in a very complex field. I suspect that a good hydrologist can explain it in very simple terms, and there are probably 5 or 6 stages of the system that need to be looked at. When we've got that structure and the wish to have a good look at communications, how complaints are dealt with, responsibilities, etc., there's an agenda formed up, and at that stage it might be that this committee considers breaking it up into bits between the different select committees. But at this, where we are now, I think the important thing is that we actually keep it in one place so that everybody knows who's involved, who wants to be involved, knows what's going on, and there's one conversation. And that we...
Sarah?
So there was a meeting, and I don't know what date it was, which the leader attended, the lead member, and residents and other councillors. And Patricia, who was the officer at the time, she was going to set up a working group, and certain residents said they wanted to be part of that. So I think Jackie and Jonathan are going to find out where that's got to, because Patricia has obviously left the council, but there's obviously no point in duplicating a working group if it's already started.
And also, we were not invited to that meeting, so I didn't know about that meeting. But I mean, I think we can decide to set up a working group in OSC, I think. And we'll go into the detail later on, because we've taken up quite a lot of time.
And the key thing is that we talk with Amanda and others who have been involved for a long time through their resident associations to get the right residents to come in. And I think, you know, Kazim, you'll have some suggestions of people you'd want to be involved from different parts of the borough too. But I think it's important that we have one conversation now and create a structure of the way forward. And then if it then wants to be broken up, we can.
Chair, can I comment
Holly,
on that?
I'm going to call Holly in.
I do remember a few years back we were working with Patricia Cuervo on a residents advisory committee doing especially work on the critical drainage areas. Yeah. And I asked her at that time, where's the hydrologist to advise us on this? And she said, oh, we can't afford a hydrologist. So if you are going to bring in a hydrologist, which is a great idea, make sure that there's funding for that kind of an expert.
Chair, can I comment on?
Right, so I think we've agreed that we will set up a working group. I mean, obviously, any member of the committee is invited to join it, And also any members, David?
I agree with Will. I think it's essential we have it. Could we actually start the ball rolling this evening and officially launch it tonight?
Okay, well, who wants to chair it? David? Okay, we're done. But I think David is now the chair, but I think any member of this committee who wants to be on it should be able to be on it, and also any resident who wants to.
We did have our very own flooded hydrologist. He sat there. Now, I didn't know his name. He wasn't very articulate. He mumbled. But he did have information because he knew all his stuff. Because I talked to him afterwards. How the hell can we find him? He might be free.
He might be on your list, David, if he pretended.
He sat here. So I just thought he wouldn't charge us possibly because he was flooded.
Okay. So fine. So David, you are the chair. We will work out the composition of the working group, and residents are invited to join. We have their details, so we can contact you about it. Okay?
Marie-Therese? Hello? Chair?
Sorry.
Oh, okay. I was just going to say it's a very good idea, what this woman said, and we can look on the video of that meeting and see who this chap is.
I think we have almost all the names and addresses of people who attended that meeting.
Oh, so perfect.
I'm not sure, but anyway.
Good.
Remember, it was recorded, so you've got what he said.
Thank you, Chair. And I think considering the comments that have been suggested and what you have suggested in terms of a working group, both from this committee as well as from housing, we're more than happy to work with David, of course, as he's been just announced to be the chair, and I think that would be the right way forward. As Amanda mentioned, yes, there are schools that have been flooded, and I've been dealing with some caseworks about the schools, and yeah, but nothing compares to home. That's where I was coming from as a housing, because the schools you go and come back, but housing and homes, they're where you live, and that's where you most of the time you spend. So I think we will go with working group, and more than happy to contribute and get members of that working to look into different sections, not just homes, but schools and tube stations, and the impacts that the flooding have now and maybe perhaps in the future. So thank you for that.
All right, so thank you everyone. We have a plan now. We're setting up a working group to look into it, and we are going to write to Thames Water again to complain, and also to Ofwat. Okay, thank you. So move on now to A5. Thank you all for coming. I don't know what A5 is. So we will now move on to A5, which is the annual complaints report. So this report contains information about the Council's performance on complaints during 20 to 21 and then 21 to 22. And I think Mary Reel will introduce the report.
I suppose one of the things to note is I think this is the first report we've had since we introduced a different process, a shorter process, sorry, a process with fewer stages in than before. The number of complaints has gone up, and I'm never certain whether that's a good or a bad thing. It could be that we're more open to, receptive of, better at recording complaints, or that we're doing everything much worse. I think that's quite hard to tell. I think the two measures on which we should particularly judge ourselves, or three actually, is how many complaints are upheld by the Ombudsman, how timely our responses are, and how good our responses are. And as you will see in paragraph 4, not all, as you will see throughout the report, not all of our performance has been wonderful. but there is a clear set of measures that we're taking to improve that performance. And I think one of the most important aspects of that, certainly in terms of timeliness, is really sort of digging down and being able to make sure that managers, get really frequent reports about how their departments are doing, or how their bit of their departments is doing. Even going down to weekly reports when it's they're not being turned around fast enough, so that we really do put some emphasis on it. I think timeliness is just so important in responding to complaints, because otherwise people feel that we're just not taking them seriously, and that they're sort of firing off complaints into a vacuum. And obviously then the quality of responses is very important. And I think the fact that so many of our complaints this year were resolved at the first stage is a good sign, a sign that the quality of those responses is heading in the right direction. So that's just a very quick overview of what we've done this year.
Thanks, Mary.
So I don't know if Sophie wants to add anything.
It strikes me that a lot of the complaints that get sort of bumped up to the Ombudsman, or that, when they kind of get to that stage, they are actually quite a lot of them upheld. Like something like 79% were upheld, and that's quite, the average was 71 or something, but can you sort of say why that is? Or
noting, I think 5 of them were to do with, sorry, I'm just referring to Sophie because she's the expert, but 5 of them were to do with one complaint. And, to be honest, we're talking about small numbers, and you're always going to get sort of movements above and below the mean. And I think that the fact that 5 of them were related to the same thing may be significant in that. But obviously, we would like to be way below that, and so that would be our aspiration. But I don't think too much can be read in that slight deviation from average there.
Thanks very much indeed. And I'll ask them all at once, and you can take them in whatever order you like. I think the increase in the number of complaints appears to be due to a more robust or a more organised complaint system. And I'm just wondering what measures you've taken that have made the system better over the last period. That was the first one. And the second one, Mary has mostly addressed this, but I think the disappointing number of complaints, or the disappointing proportion that are not answered within the target time. And the lead members explain what's being done, or some of the things that are being done about that. But I'm wondering, what are the emerging trends looking like this year? Are we seeing an improvement, or have we still got work to do to change that? And then I had a comment on the equality section, where the report expressed disappointment with the results. But I have to say, I'm personally not surprised at all about the results, because I think the absolute last thing anybody wants to do who's made a complaint about council services is to answer intrusive personal questions. So I think unless that's relevant to the complaint, I think people will raise it for themselves. That was more of a comment. And finally, the duplication of systems between housing management and the complaints system seems to be rather inefficient, and I wonder if we can have a comment on that and what might be being done to stop that duplication, which must be taking up quite a lot of staff time.
And thanks for that. So yes, I think we have introduced a corporate team now that is responsible for complaints, which was not the case previously, and a case management system. So what that means now is there is a team within the council that is responsible for making sure when complaints come in, they're logged on a system, and that we record the responses going back and the date of the response, so we can check the response times. And also we're trying to capture some intelligence about what the complaint was about and what we need to learn and improve on. So that has led to a better data source in terms of what our complaints are. It is very, very likely that before, complaints might not have been logged or recorded, and therefore we didn't know that they had been dealt with. And we also have been much clearer now where staff receive something from a resident, even if it's not called a complaint, but if it clearly is a complaint and an expression of dissatisfaction, that we expect that to be logged so that we can track it and we can make sure we really understand where residents are complaining. So I think that's why we're seeing a better data set that allows us to understand what we're receiving, how we're dealing with it, and how we're responding. There is already a system within housing management which is very well developed, and so the agreement that we've had is that we will have an integration built between the two systems, but I think COVID has meant that actually the IT service have struggled to prioritise that for us. So at the moment we have some processes in place to make sure that we check the data across, but we are asking for an integration to make sure that we can have that single source of data electronically as well as the way we share it at the moment. In terms of the trends currently around answering times, we're still seeing trends of the target times not being met. I think there is a period of adjustment for the council as we move to a two-stage process where we had previously been at a three-stage process, and that process has shortened the timescales. So there is a little adjustment for staff to get used to that, and we do continue to make sure that we report that through to executive directors and lead members quarterly so they can see how that's working and try and offer support through our team wherever we can. I absolutely take your point about the equality data, and of course it's people's own choice whether they wish to share that information. I think we just look wherever we can to try and reassure ourselves that the service is inclusive for everybody and nobody would feel disadvantaged in the way they approach it. So I think we have to be smarter about the way we try and understand whether there are obstacles in the process for people and rely on them to volunteer data, and that's one of the things we're trying to think about this year.
Thanks very much. Just one I'll come back on, Sophie, on your comprehensive answer, and that's the linkage with the housing management system. And I do understand the last two years haven't been the easiest to make progress with things like this, but have you got a time estimate and a cost estimate for what could be a potentially quite complicated software update?
I don't, but this is a very good prompt for me to prioritise that with my colleagues in IT, so I'll take it away, and I can see Doug looking at me, so I'm sure he'll be pleased to do that with me as well.
Might be worth noting in that context, of course, the disentanglement of IT won't help to accelerate the process, but that doesn't mean it's not a priority.
Kazim.
Thank you, Chair. I do understand some of the complaints could be long-time standing complaints, in fact, when the TMO was in charge rather than directed from the council when it comes to the housing management, and I think that's something we should work on towards. But my question is going back to the 3.8, the outcome of complaint, and what the Chair already mentioned in terms of the percentage. So let's, if we talk about the figures, just almost 50-50, 55% of complaints have been upheld or partially upheld, whereas 45% are not upheld. Having said that, 72% of the ombudsman has been upheld, and I think what this report is suggesting, councillors like RBKC, like ours, haven't learnt from what has been happening, and this I would like to know the root of the complaint and the root of dealing with the complaint, and is there something that we haven't learned from for the last 3 years, and what can we do to improve and learn from, since the complaint of other councils, for example, Greater London, 79% of the complaints have been upheld. Is there something that we're missing here for our borough, and is there something we can learn from in the future to make sure that complaints are seriously being dealt with? Yes, I welcome the 3 stages as being reduced now to 2 stages, because it makes life a lot easier to deal with 2 stages rather than 3 stages. So could you please tell us about the average of other councillors, other local authorities, 79%, whereas ours is just over 50-50. How is the process of looking into the complaint? Thank you.
So we have a 2-stage complaints process where at the first stage a resident will write their complaint and the relevant manager for the service, usually overseen by a head of service, will investigate the complaint and provide a response, and the target time for that I think is 10 working days. And then we have, should someone be unhappy with that, they are offered the opportunity to escalate the complaint to stage 2, at which case it would be investigated and responded to by a director to make sure that it's looked at from that perspective, and that there's not the kind of same mindset in looking at the complaint. Somebody else takes a fresh look at it. And then at the end of stage 2, should someone be unhappy, they can go to the Ombudsman. There's a difference between the 55% where within the council, when answering either a stage 1 or a stage 2, I can't remember which one it was, we've said we uphold the complaint, we agree, and we've offered an apology or some means of rectification. Usually people will go to the Ombudsman where we haven't upheld the complaint because they won't be happy with what we've offered as a solution. So often it's the ones where we haven't upheld that they would go through to the Ombudsman because they're not happy with the finding. And we get quite a detailed report from the Ombudsman, which we do use as part of our learning. And I haven't seen that there are any particular trends coming through the Ombudsman in terms of things that we haven't done consistently across all of the different complaints they've upheld on. It's more individual issues that are related to that particular complaint where we found learning that we could do. I believe there are some, that it's kind of summarised in the report, there are some learning that we've already taken out of what we've got feedback from the Ombudsman. It really is worth saying that of those 79% of complaints that were upheld by the Ombudsman, 5 were relating to the same issue. So that does skew the figures slightly, since there were only 19 that were referred through. But we look at the Ombudsman findings, we always support them and act in line with them, and we make changes to the service. But there aren't emerging at the moment any trends across all of those that suggest that there's something fundamentally that we're doing wrong.
Follow-up question, if you don't mind. Thank you for that clarification. But in terms of the services, of course, that we provide as a council, first thing I think we need to learn from this is to provide the services that are expected from us to improve whatever we could do to make sure that the complaints are minimum. But then again, when complaints happen, it's our responsibility not to go to the third stage where Ombudsman gets involved and then overturn for whatever we've decided. So I think we need to look into 2 stages. Stage 1, to get the service right for our residents, and stage 2, to make sure that it does not go the third point, because we have a 2-stage here. And when the Ombudsman goes, and you've got, this is the problem, if it goes back to the Ombudsman and we get the feedback, that shows we're not learning from that feedback. So hopefully when the next reports comes, fewer complaints will go to Ombudsman and then overturn from what our officers and senior managers and directors have done. So in that case, I think we have a base to work with. So I appreciate if you take that point on board.
Lindsay.
Suzanne, very briefly, top of page 20, Children's Services recorded 53 complaints in 2021 compared with 47 the previous year. This represents a 27% increase. Does it?
Yes, I noticed that as well.
There's a maths issue
not quite
there.
Right.
It's about 13%, that order of magnitude. Or the original numbers that actually go back to the table at the top, one of them is incorrect.
My apologies.
Well,
thank you, Chairman. I just had a quick look at page 6, the root cause of all complaints under 320, and the service delay, quality of service, service failure and communications group, the first 4 groups, seem to cover more than half of the sources of complaints. And it would strike me that probably, from my experience as councillor, main trade from residents, that what they really mean is that they don't get an answer to their initial question, and rather than persisting with the council, they come to us as councillors to persist with people we know within the council rather than the system. Is it not the fact that for many years we've not invested enough in our customer services, and that we've relied for our IT on outside people, and it's very welcome that we've now brought it in. in-house and we're disentangling, and that is a difficult issue, and we're investing in software and we're spending quite a lot of money. But should we not be spending more and faster to get rid of the basic cause of this problem? Because yes, complaints that go to the Ombudsman are the really serious ones. But if you reduce the base of the triangle or the pyramid vastly by just having a more efficient communication in the first place, there will be far fewer cases to deal with. And I have to say that whenever I've managed to deal with somebody like Doug Goldring, who's sitting in front of us, or Terry Oliver or something like that, one gets a reply within hours, a very good reply, which the residents are usually happy with, and it's usually followed up in some complex cases by, a resident who's discharged from a cancer operation and arrives in the summer, but they actually need heating when the heating's switched off, and they arranged portable electric heaters within about 3 hours on a Friday afternoon, which was fantastic response. So the capability of the individual parts of the council to fulfill the functions that the residents want is there. It's just the connection between the problem and that capability that's not there, and we ought to be faster in investing and push harder for our investing in our IT and holding the data in one place within the council. So I think the bits are there. I'm just urging that we do it harder and faster. And yes, it will cost a little bit more money in the first few years. Then we'll save money in terms of wasted officer time. I mean, wasted councillor time doesn't cost anything, but wasted officer time costs a lot of money. So could I put that to Sophie? Perhaps that's...
So it's probably not appropriate for me to comment on investment decisions, but we are, as you say, we are investing in improving our first point of contact, and that's really important in terms of reducing the frustration for residents who have to contact us again and again. So it is an area that we are investing in, certainly in my area as part of the customer access programme. And I think our expectation is that by improving people's ability to get the answer they need at the first point of contact, we should be able to reduce complaints that relate to service delays or frustrations in being able to report to us what it is they need.
Yeah. I mean, I remember when I was on holiday and my passport had been left at home, and I'd managed to get to South France without a passport, that I was able to track and trace my passport as it went all the way to Poland and back to the UK and then back to me in the south of France. I mean, the service was absolutely useless, and my ability to take my passport with me was also useless, but the ability to track and trace it across Europe was brilliant. If we could add a little bit of track and trace to a brilliant service that does exist within the council officers' remit, then I think we'd be making progress.
It's also worth, sorry, if I can just add that, it's also worth adding that genuinely not all of these are to do with IT, or could be optimised by IT. Some of them are just to do with human error, and that's why what Sophie was talking about earlier, about capturing as increasingly good data about what we're doing wrong really matters. Because service delay, I mean, it covers a huge multitude of issues really, and what we need to do is to be able to dig down and really be tackling all of the issues, including, I absolutely agree about IT investment.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for this extensive report. I mean, of course, in any complaint, as Councillor Wheel said, it's across the platform where all the issues come together, hopefully for a quality service. So this complaint procedure, hopefully it will be waved away in addressing quality in the provision of service. And as you indicated there in the report, in the children's services, that they are not aware of the, they can complain or the complaint process. What would you consider, for example, if somebody raised an issue as a query, how would it be seen as a complaint if it is written in that format? And as Councillor Wee said, we are looking at the data quality in terms of when we are receiving and you are dealing with these issues, the aim is to improve the quality of service across the platform. So what measure do you have to capture this data quality? Thank you, sorry.
So your first question about how do we determine whether someone is making a complaint or not? What we do is we look for whether they have already tried to access some solution and it has failed. So they're not asking for something for the first time. They've already tried to access the service they need and it hasn't worked, or something hasn't happened as it should have done, or they're unhappy with the outcome of a process they've been through. And where that is the case, if the correspondence, even if they're not saying they're making a complaint, we encourage officers to register that as a complaint so that it can be properly investigated. And that also includes casework that we may receive from members. So if we receive casework and it's clear that the resident has cause for concern, and whether they call it a complaint or not, it is a complaint about the service they've received, we ask for that to be logged on the complaint system, because that means that we know we're recording dissatisfaction and we've got the structure in place to try and learn from it. So those are the kind of principles that we use when determining whether someone is making a complaint, whether they use the word complaint or not. Your second point was how we measure the data quality, I think. So the case system we have is one that's used by many local authorities to register complaints and to track them, and it has a number of categories. I think we have found that not all staff use it as well as they could. So they record the kind of core basic things that they need to, but there are other bits of it that maybe they don't always give the data into it that they do. And that's why we've set up a complaints network. We've got links into every department, and we're offering training and support. And we can see, because we've got a system, where maybe users need a bit more training because they're not using all of the elements of it. So we're trying to use the system to tell us where more training, more support is needed. And we're also trying to encourage the organisation, whilst it's really disappointing to get a complaint, we shouldn't be afraid of getting complaints or logging them. We should accept that we have room to learn and room to improve. And so to take that approach when they're receiving a complaint, so they look at it with those eyes rather than being afraid of it and not wanting it to be registered. So we're trying to address the cultural issue, but also give training, and using a very structured data system to try and make sure that we understand what it is we're seeing and what it is we need to improve.
David?
Briefly, Mary, you alluded at the beginning that clearly there might be more complaints made because more people are complaining because the service is indifferent and that's what they've experienced, or just because people are more inclined to complain. I just wonder, and this is, I suppose, possibly for Barry more than for you, do you sense that the overall standard of service provision is broadly comparable, COVID notwithstanding, in the 2 years?
Well, I'm sort of vying between a type 1 error and a type 2 error here. Am I likely to say something that proves to be wrong, or will I say something that's wrong that proves to be right? The issue is very, very difficult to judge as to whether or not the propensity to complain has increased relative to the level of service, because of course levels of service have dropped throughout all sectors because of essentially COVID and people not having the level of response that they normally have. Now, whether we are more affected by that than other authorities, I don't know. But the other point is this: are people more inclined to complain at the present time, and has that changed? I'm afraid we don't have information on that. And if we did, I would doubt its veracity.
I mean, I could just adding to that, I think over the years it'll be interesting to look at we might see an overall growth in complaints, but is there a bigger growth in one area than another area, or one service than another service? I think in a way that's more indicative than overall numbers, but augmented by trying not only encouraging complaints, but also being better at recording things that aren't necessarily labelled complaint, but clearly are a complaint about our service, which was a matter of culture and trying to disseminate. So I wouldn't be at all worried if I saw another increase in complaints next year. What I would be more worried about is if I saw a really big spike in one particular service.
Thank you. Janet.
Thank you for this. I see that there's been a huge change in ethos, is what I gather from here. And I'd like to know how you are handling phone complaints. Are they voice generated? I see that it says here there's voice user interface. Is there human contact at the end? Do they call back? And can you talk to us about the training that you are giving to the people who are taking these complaints and how they are being trained to be open to our residents and caring?
I think that can be deemed to be Sophie's specialist subject, so I'm going to hand over to her.
So we have two ways for people to give their complaint by a voice. If they choose to use the online form, it can be voice generated, so you can speak to the form and the voice will fill it in, the form will be filled in for you based on what you say. But we also have a dedicated phone line which has people at the end of it, and the corporate complaints team use that line to take complaints from people directly over the phone. So we do have a telephone service that reaches a human being within the council, and those are then recorded straight into the system by the officer who's taking the call. The training that we offer people is quite broad. There's the technical training, what you should do, when you should respond by, what you should enter into the system. But we also are doing some targeted training for people in particular services that get particular types of complaint, to help think about what are the factors that they need to consider in their investigation. We also have been helping people by giving them templates so they can follow a consistent process in responding, be clear about their conclusions, what investigation they undertook, what their findings were, and we tend to do quite targeted training with people where we feel that there are a number of complaints where because we do quality checks, the team do quality checks, so they can pick up where actually maybe some of the tone could improve, maybe some of the quality of the investigation could improve. So it's quite wide-ranging, and we tend to run training sessions throughout the year, not one-off exercises. And we're using this complaints network where we've got a number of officers embedded in each department to support that work, so that we understand some of the themes and the trends and can think about how we tailor the training towards that. But the empathy with the person, certainly when we're speaking to them on the phone, and now we're also asking everybody to phone a resident when they get a complaint so they can talk to them before they respond. It's a really good way of understanding what the complaint is, maybe resolving it more quickly in terms of what the actual issue is, and then thinking about what the response really needs to focus on. So we're trying to offer staff training on how to do that as well. So a little bit of culture, a little bit around the way in which we engage with residents and give them that positive experience, but also some of the technical bits about how to do a good investigation and how to do a good, strong response.
That's a good direction.
So, do we have any more questions? Okay, well, thank you very much for that work and the report. I think it's really important to just keep on going and tracking over time so that you can see patterns and yeah. Okay, thank you. So we'll move on now to the budget report, which, as everyone knows, we do have a working group that looks into the budget, but I would like, this is the main report, so I would like Mary perhaps to introduce it. But just to say before you do, on the second page on 3.1, It says the Overview and Scrutiny Committee has overall responsibility for financial management across the organisation. And I think that's somewhat exaggerating our powers. We have responsibility for scrutiny, but we don't do the money ourselves. So anyway, Mary.
Yes, I mean, it's in a very, very difficult year to be putting a budget together in terms of what's known and what's unknown. What I can sort of add, I suppose, is that the budget settlement that we had has helped us to put that budget together. We're living in uncertain times about the long term, which is something we keep highlighting, and it keeps sort of, the fairer funding keeps receding into the distance, but it has to constantly be in the back of our minds, because when it does happen, it will doubtless have a very important impact on us. The paper before you clearly, I hope, outlines the pressures, the service pressures that we're under, the suggested savings that we make, and the growth that we accept in the budget. And really not much more to say about it except open to questions. And Taryn, if I missed anything particularly that I should have pointed out.
So if I could just mention, so within this particular agenda item, there's 3 different reports. So we've just talked through the general fund report, and there's 2 separate HRA reports which we'll come on to. I guess the only other thing to flag is the outcome of the consultation on the budget, which is set out within the report. So I know we're going to come on to the next agenda item will be the report for the working group, but this particularly picked up some of the responses from the community consultation. So still very low in number, increase on the previous year. Yes, almost 100% increase, but yeah, so just really to flag that consultation was open from the 12th of November to the 12th of January.
First, David, on page 15, Taryn, it's under the Environment and Communities section at the very, very bottom of the page. It says we're expecting a report from Ofwat about the floods on the 12th of July. Is that correct? And when are we going to get it?
I believe that is correct. We haven't received it, so that's correct at this point in time, but I think it would be helpful to be able to clarify exactly when that will come through.
Okay, thanks, Taryn. So, David.
Whether for Mary or for Taryn, there is a reference, and I have to say I can't find it in here, but I went through it on my laptop where I could search it, about parking income, which you acknowledge is subject to fluctuations, but it's also the largest single item of income we have. But many of us over the last almost 2 years have seen a marked reduction in the number of cars in the borough. What work have we done in discussion with the parking department as to both the pay and display but also residents parking, as to what the trends are? Because if marked reductions in parking income carry on into the future, that has a very serious implication for us.
Yeah, so thank you. So I think the update in the report is really picking up on the current trend. So in 2021, which is the first year, obviously we did say a remarkable reduction in income. I have to say in 21-22, and leadership team will see the latest forecast, income has recovered, I think, probably more than what we'd anticipated. So it's not quite at the pre-COVID levels, but certainly is moving in the right direction. The shortfall is much smaller. What happens long term, I think, is very much still a bit of uncertainty. There are lots of different moving parts of the jigsaw. One is permanent changes in behaviour as a result of COVID. But equally, there are changes, I think, generally linked to net carbon zero, as you picked up around car usage, and just generally that change that we kind of need to be forecasting the impact of all of those. So that work is underway. So it's not covered in this year's budget, but it is underway, and finance officers are working quite closely with the parking team at the moment to pull together a note which tries to attempt to bring some of that together. So some of it is a lot of unknown, but I think certainly we are working on some of that scenario planning so we can look at what the possible impact will be. But I think it is, it's the long-term impact of COVID and change in behaviour, but more than that, there are wider changes that are happening around car usage, electric vehicles, carbon net zero, just generally all that we need to take into consideration, some of which we will have a greater influence on others. I think it is a key source of income, 50.2 million kind of pre-COVID, so it is quite a significant financial risk that we need to be keeping a close eye on.
Just to add to that, I mean, some of that will be policy. As we move more and more towards electric cars, some of the discounts that we give may fall out as what was minority encouragement becomes the norm, and so the model will change of how we get our income from parking over the years as well as a result of policy.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks to Mary and Taryn and your teams for putting this together, and well done. I'll start with a couple of technical questions, if I may, to improve my understanding before I go on to a specific one. First one is, we've created over the last year or so the capital pipeline. Could you explain to the committee what the distinction between that and the capital programme is, and how money's flexed between the two? That's the first technical question. And then the second one, can you explain a little bit more about what the quote, prudent borrowing limit, unquote, is?
Line to start with. So the pipeline is the fundamental reason for having the pipeline is to try and be more realistic about what we're actually planning to achieve in year, without scaring the horses and taking things out of the pipeline so that people hold on to things too tightly and absolutely insist they're going to do them when they actually don't, for fear that it's going to fall out and not go back in again. So we've actually got two pipelines, Pipeline 1 and Pipeline 2, and things from Pipeline 1 can move into the current year if everyone gets their acting gear, but basically funding, or the sort of projected, the finance for it is discounted in a different way to the main capital programme. Is that fair enough? And no financing for Pipeline 2 is included in our revenue budget. So it's a way of making sure that we don't use up too much of our revenue budget trying to plan for capital works that may not occur. And deciding on what goes into the pipelines is driven by officers, but there is also some member oversight of that process and challenge to what can come out. I still don't think that everything, we were discussing this recently, that everything that's in the capital programme should still be in there. There's still some more challenge to do, but I think we're at a better place than we were a year ago in terms of robustness, and some of it's about capacity to deliver the capital programme and whether we've got enough of that for what we've got in there now to be realistic. But as I say, I do think we're in a better place. But Taryn, might want to add to that.
Not necessarily to add to the first one, I suppose just to really flag to the committee that review, I think we saw the first output of the review of the capital programme back in November. Obviously what you're seeing tonight is obviously some further suggestions. That review process is still continuing, and I think it absolutely has to continue right up until the point that we agree the capital programme. I think we want some assurance that by the time we get to the point of approval, that anything that's in the capital programme, as Mary says, is kind of backed up by a robust, not necessarily a business case, but quite a detailed plan, or at least there's a plan of action in terms of that scheme. And I think historically we've had schemes in the programme that just haven't had those delivery plans behind them. So,
10 years.
Yes, yeah. Yeah. So we've been really quite ruthless this time, and I think having the capital pipeline has allowed us to do that. I think had we not had the pipeline, there is a lot more reluctance to take things out of the programme. So I don't think we'll get the perfect capital programme this year, but I think it's a real step change, I think, in terms of the way Kensington does its capital programme. And just in terms of the financial implications, so in terms of capital pipeline one, we will budget for 50% of those schemes potentially coming through in year. So, you know, there is that absolutely that opportunity for things to come out of the pipeline once the project plans have been developed.
So just to increase my understanding of that, so if a line item is in the pipeline and the work has got to a sufficient maturity, or the proposal has got to sufficient maturity in year, the money can be made available if it's in the pipeline?
It can, yeah. So we budget for the 50%. So that proposal will go to our Officer Capital Board, which meet every 6 weeks. They'll consider the plan, and if it's robust enough, it can come out into the programme, because there will be that financial envelope. So it all needs to be contained within the financial envelope that we set the budget on, which is based on the capital programme plus also 50% of the pipeline. So, you know, based on previous couple of years, there isn't we're well within that 50% threshold, and that will get reported up through quarterly finance reports to leadership team, anything that comes out of the pipeline.
Thank you. My second question was about the prudent borrowing limit, which I'm very grateful for the long answer, because that's what I wanted, but prudent borrowing limits, what can you say about that?
So the council will have an approved limit essentially based on its balance sheet, almost the maximum amount that it can robustly borrow each year. We're always well below that limit, so that will come forward. We're kind of putting together the final Treasury budget as we speak, so that will come forward in more detail in the budget report to leadership team. We are well within that approved limit, so we we have that potential to borrow more than what we do. What I would just say is that it needs to be affordable. So all of the borrowing will incur some revenue costs, and so it is absolutely really critical that obviously those revenue costs are affordable. And that's another reason why having that robust review of the capital programme, we're not building in borrowing costs that aren't going to be needed.
Thanks very much. I did have another more specific question, if I'm allowed, Chair. Thank you very much. I noticed amongst the savings there's been a significant achievement from the Housing Department on TA costs, and I'm wondering firstly how has that been achieved and how robust it is, and my congratulations to them for that achievement. But
I think one of the key ways that the service have achieved it is really looking at prevention initiatives, so finding ways of avoiding or either moving people out of temporary accommodation or avoiding them going in the first place, and that's been the sort of thrust of how they've made the savings.
Yes, and I'll just add to that. I mean, you'll recall we have put in place a Homeless Prevention Act and recruited people specifically in order to address this, in order to have honest conversations with residents, saying, you know, the likelihood of receiving council accommodation, the time it would probably take, and that's proved to be, and it's proving to continue to do. I think the other thing that also has happened is that we've recruited into the management of our TA accommodation, and so we're identifying better sources of property, and most importantly also making sure that we've got a proper standard of property as well. And at the moment, the budget that we put together here very much takes from our experience of the previous year, so it's not a sort of finger in the air. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I know we'll go into some more detail on that in the HCSC meeting in March, but thanks for that initial answer. Thank you.
Kazim.
Thank you, Chair. And in fact, I would like to get more clarification on TA accommodation and the reduction of the budget. 11.4 last year, it says just under £300,000 of reduction has been managed, but next year, 2022 to 2023 financial year, almost that figure triples to just under £900,000. So I would like to know how this has been achieved in more details, and what impact it could have on TA recommendations. That's one. And my second question similarly will be 11.6. We know the impact of COVID, the long COVID last year had on the financial impact, whether it's from the housing or social investment. I would like to know the unknowns of the impact of COVID and the economic pressure for our council and how we can mitigate. And if the directors or the lead member can give us indication of those unknowns that we cannot account for now, but can give us indications of what those unknowns could be, I would appreciate. Thank you very much. 11.4. It's 11.4, page 17.
So if I can pick up on 11.4, so I think as Mr. Miller's just highlighted, I think the main initiatives were focused around prevention, so the numbers, so keeping numbers going into TA, avoiding the increasing numbers going through to TA is one of the reasons, but also for those that we do support in temporary accommodation, keeping the costs of that TA down, so working with the providers to keep that. And just the combination of those initiatives over the last couple of years have had a positive impact on the costs or the budget that we have to allow for TA. So, you know, the impact on, because of the focus around prevention, it is about avoiding people needing temporary accommodation rather than it being a significant impact on anybody that's in accommodation at the time. And the further savings that are planned of 896, so 296 of that had already been agreed last year, and absolutely from the continuation of those initiatives. But the latest, and it's quite a detailed model that's kept together by finance and the services, based on the latest numbers and the forecast, we do believe that there's a further 600 can be made. So that's where those savings materialise from. We can get you a more detailed kind of summary of that, but essentially it is around those initiatives that we've had in place for the last 2 years, focusing on prevention and, as I say, really keeping down the costs of those that are in temporary accommodation. So the price that we pay, we've been managed to keep low over the last couple of years. Kim, do you want me to come?
No, I think that's fine. And as far as your comment on COVID, and I'll lump in some of the unknowns that we have, we obviously have also got potentially a large number of asylum seekers and refugees we have in this borough that at the moment obviously we're very much supporting, but we're not anticipating to have a housing obligation as far as they're concerned. That's something which you have to monitor very closely. In terms of the impact of COVID on individuals, we do obviously have a number of support packages that we have both within the HRA, I think referred to in the report, and also outside in terms of those of a top as far as universal credit is concerned, or council tax is concerned. You know, but it is a worry. We're not seeing any big impact on it at the moment, but I don't know if you've got any comments to make on COVID and tenants. I know it's housing management rather than allocation, but what are your experience, Doug?
No, I don't. I don't feel it has made a huge amount of difference in terms of this particular item. Kim?
Can I just come back one further thing? So obviously in 11.7, so one of the other initiatives is increasing the supply. So it links to the price of temporary accommodation. It's around increasing the supply of temporary accommodation. So obviously the figures that we've talked about in 11.4 are the revenues budget, but the council's capital programme does include includes a total of 40 million for the purchase of TA. 15 million, as it says in 11.7, is in the capital programme, and actually kind of picking up on the pipeline discussion earlier, a further 25 is in the pipeline that can come out as it's required. But the supply of temporary accommodation is just one of the many different factors that we can do to keep our costs down.
Can I just have a follow-up question, Chair? Thank you. Thank you very much for that explanation. And I think since we're going to look into more of a temporary accommodation in March meeting for the housing and communities, I would appreciate if these figures and all the related figures in terms of the cost and the reduction of temporary accommodation, what has been achieved last year and what's now proposed or forecast, which is almost a triple than what we had I would appreciate if these figures and financial can be added to the meeting so the Select Committee, Housing and Communities, can look into more details and then hopefully comment on it. Thank you.
Very happy to do that. And I think just a general thing that we've forgotten is that our number of people in TA is actually reduced from over 2,300 to 2,100 and something now. So we have been successful in terms of reducing those people in TA.
Okay, David, and then we can move on to the housing revenue account. Have we discussed that yet? I mean, this came in very late, so we've only just been able to skim read it. But anyway, David.
At point 7.4 on page 4, the draft service budgets do, however, include provision for a 2% pay award in 2022-23. Inflation is 5.5%. It's unlikely, I would suggest, to be significantly less than that this year. Is that realistic? And I'm just wanting to distinguish between the money, the financial 2% that goes into a budget, and actually the provision of the amount that is paid to our staff, our officers, who deliver a service for us.
So in terms of our own staff, I think it is realistic. The award is unlikely to be more than 1.75%. A bigger driver for us for inflation will be contract inflation. And interestingly, as you now know, we are compiling and near to putting on a system, a contract register for the first time ever throughout the council. And one of the things, of course, that occurred to me when we've been talking about inflation recently is that it's quite difficult for us to tell what the inflation effect will be on our contracts, because it'll affect some contracts much more than others. And some contracts will have they'll all have different inflation terms in them and different dates to which the inflation is hooked. So, for example, a contract renewing this week might actually have its inflation indexation linked to 9 months ago, because that's how the contract was set up, and that would be a fairly low level of inflation. So one of the things we're looking at now is how we can build into our contract register the ability to run reports on stuff like that. But that's in the future. So at the moment we can't tell, essentially. We can tell there will be some inflationary push from those contracts, and probably out of £225 million worth of contracts, £100 million will be more adversely affected than the others, because they've got the type of staff in them, or the type of rarity of staff in them that will cause a cost push. And we hope we will accommodate that centrally within a contingency for this year, until we are in a better position to work out what the long-term implications are.
But it would be unfortunate to lose too many staff.
Sorry?
It would be unfortunate to lose too many staff. And I can think of one in flooding who was our resident expert, who is no longer with us, and I'm not suggesting that was purely financially related, but I wouldn't want to say that might not have played a factor in it.
Local government always has a problem retaining specialist staff for just that reason, that they can move between the public and the private sector. What we can say is that if you want to stay in the private sector, the deal's the same wherever you are in London or indeed the country, which is some comfort in terms of resisting inflationary pressure on that front.
Can I just add one further detail on the contract inflation? And we've kind of changed the approach of how we deal with inflation in the budget, probably for the last 2 years. So what used to happen previously was, before the budgets were set, so this time of the year, that essentially all contract budgets would get inflated by an average of 2%. So that would go in. What we tend to do, and we introduced it for the last 2 years, and it will look good, is that we hold, quite often, contract negotiations don't happen till after the start of the financial year. So what we tend to do now is we hold that central provision for inflation, and as services, so it's an adequate provision, So in previous years it's been based on 2%. We would hold that and then services would draw down from that central allocation as they go through those negotiations. And two reasons is the contracts are also different. There will be, we provide to an average of 2% in previous years. Some may have no inflationary increase because of where they are, others may be much higher. What we tend to find is we never quite fully utilise that inflation provision each year. So that's kind of previous years. What we're doing this year, as Mary said, is, so for contract inflation, we haven't built anything. The service budgets you see here don't include any provision at the moment for contract inflation, but we are holding a more significant provision centrally that, as Mary said, for the 100 million would allow, you know, if it is much more than 2%, 3%, 4%, and I'm thinking kind of social care and kind of the waste sectors, that's where we're going to see it. That provision is there for services to draw down, but equally there will probably be other contracts where the inflation increase might be 2% or it may well be less. So I feel there's an adequate provision there, but it allows for that differential between different contracts. So it's just a slight shift of how we've dealt with things over the last couple of years, just to avoid building inflation into budgets where it's not required.
Does anyone have any further questions? Okay, fine. So we will move on then to the final draft of the budget working group. Well, yes, it was part of it. I did. You may. And I was going to say about the HRA, because it came so late, that if people have not had a chance to read it, then they will be able to put their comments in writing. But yes, do the HRA now.
As you might expect, would be under carbon net zero, the commitment of the Council to carbon net zero by 2030 for its own operations. And under section 13 of the HRA paper that we have on page 12, under little b, it says one of the options for reducing borrowing levels to be considered will be revisiting the timescale for achieving carbon zero goal. The first thing is that my memory, I think I'm probably the only councillor who didn't actually vote on the council motion since I was mayor at the time and did not have a vote, and I was chairing the meeting. But as I understand it, the carbon net zero commitment by the council is a council commitment, which is not a leadership team or devolved officer decision, that it is a commitment of the council, which it tasks all the leadership team and executive team within the council to achieve. Now, having said that, what I don't understand from reading this paper is the understanding of the terms used, because the terms of net zero, neutral, carbon zero seem to be used interchangeably. And to my mind, there's an enormous difference between that. So in the budgetary provision in the HRA, originally I understand the estimate to have been around about 96 or 100 million pounds, and that's been upgraded because of various reanalyses up to 110, 125 is a figure I heard of recently. And there is some further work still to be done with some unknowns. And there are particularly, apart from, obviously you'll know your own patch, but that's not the issue. The issues seem to be around different analyses that have been done, one from the Ether report, one from another series of analyses, reconciling those. And then there's how much is going to be done by business as usual. What I mean by that is that gas hobs tend to be going out and induction hobs tend to be coming in. Just that's the way the world's moving. So even if we didn't have a climate crisis, we'd probably be moving through that, and it would have a decarbonising effect as long as the grid goes that way. So that's a sort of business as usual effect. And within the sustainable strategy group across all departments, that's taken to be about 40% or so of the job that the council's going to do is going to be done by business as usual things, stock turn if you like, maintenance, but doing it in a slightly different way. Decarbonising of the grid is another aspect of this, but the key here seems to be understanding the difference between carbon net zero and carbon zero. And the Green Plan sets it out very clearly that the carbon net zero 2030 objective is broken down into fabric with regard to buildings, which is 90% of the job the council's got to do. 57% is in housing, which is your purview, and then the rest of that is in other buildings the council has. So within that job, fabric first, sustainable systems second, and a tariff or provisions. Taryn quite rightly said we can't actually tariff ourselves. We can make provisions. So with the offset can be in a form of provision rather than a tariff. So if we have those three structural elements within the HRA budget that we're looking at the moment, have you budgeted to achieve carbon zero by 2030 as is implied under section 13(1)(b), or have you provided for net zero as of 2 pages previous to that? So that's really what I'm getting at, because if you're trying to go carbon zero by 2030, I can understand that's a virtually impossible target. But to achieve carbon net zero by 2030, you could do it tomorrow. Just heat everything with on-peak electric and have a zero carbon grid assumption, and you'd be carbon zero. But you wouldn't have achieved your warmer homes target, or your maintenance target, or your lack of condensation target, or all of the other targets that you have. So what has actually been assumed in the build-up of the HRA capital provision that is looked at as being a big ask at the moment in terms of borrowing?
Okay, so let's do that in 2 bits. I'll let Doug answer the specific question about zero, net zero. I think you made a comment about you know your own patch, and the answer is yes, we do, but we've got so many unknowns at the moment. I think it's fair to say that we've done a considerable amount of work on identifying what we need to do to spend on our buildings. And at the moment, from a baseline of 10 million a year, we're spending 4 or 5 times that amount as the capital programme that we have is underway. At the moment, it won't come as a surprise, as within our new homes programme, absolutely no different to our capital improvement programme, we're getting a lot of cost pressure at the moment. We're seeing it in terms of labour and materials. And those are incredibly difficult for us to factor in. And as it says within the report, there is a flag saying that we are concerned about debt levels as to what those debt levels could go to given this cost inflation. Now, in the work programme we have prioritised fabrics of buildings, things which are going to certainly benefit us as far as carbon zero is concerned. But within the overall commitment to 2030, which is only 7 years away on a 7-year programme, it is a worry and a concern to us as to how we do it, because the safety valve will be on how we might reprogram some of that work. But as to the specific question, Doug?
So the actual amount is based upon our sustainability plan, which we brought to leadership last year. So that sets out everything within housing that we said we would do to meet this agenda. My understanding is it would be net zero, but on the basis that we are applying a fabric first approach, and therefore, as you said, what we're going to do after that in terms of heating supply and so on and so forth. That's what these figures are based on. I will ensure that terminology is clear throughout the report, so we all understand.
Is it possible, perhaps not for this committee, but for the ESC, if we could have a bit more detail on how that global figure was built up?
Yeah, absolutely, because we're due to come certainly to that committee in a couple of weeks' time, I think.
Yeah, 2nd of February, that's right. Yeah. And by the way, I would like to make a point of congratulating the team on being imaginative on using new technology. I received a copy of a letter draft that was going to our residents, and Kim, no doubt you have had it both as a lead member and deputy leader, but also as a Stanley councillor, that in Elm Park Gardens, that they're to expect some drones to be flying around the estate. We're doing thermographic surveys, which I thought was a very good use of modern technology. I've seen it done out of a Buccaneer aircraft, but maybe that's a little bit heavy duty in the centre of London, and the modern version is with drones, so well done.
I don't think our budget stretches to the Buccaneer. I think one of the things, just on that, thank you for that, is that I circulated around to all the councillors the work that's being done on two particular blocks, which the first one's going through at the moment, up on the Lancaster West, and it goes through the sort of things that you can do and the sort of things that we are doing in terms of greening stock. But West, we will be innovative, but the cost remains a worry.
Yeah. I understand that with Lancaster West that it's, for very obvious tragic reasons, it's in a special budgetary area. Some of the more recent project work on more run-of-the-mill council, I don't know, maybe that's the wrong way of putting it, but more usual, more programmed maintenance and upgrade would also be useful, because we visited as a select committee the Lancaster West estate and were very impressed with the program there, but there was some top-of-the-range, should I put it, measures being investigated which would not be possible to roll out across the rest of the estate. So it's a very good case study of what can be done, but the more normal projects dealing with, with business as usual would also be useful.
We'll bring that to Select Committee.
Thank you very much indeed. Cheers. Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Kim.
Okay, so now we will move on to the final report of the Budget Working Group. Unfortunately, Adrian Beryl-Cox, the Chair, could not be with us this evening, so I'm going to ask Councillor Lindsay, who's a member of the group, if he could introduce it for us.
Thank you, Chairman. This was prepared under the auspices of the chairmanship of Councillor Beryl-Cox. As Councillor Rossi has said, there are half a dozen recommendations. I'm not going to go through them, but if people have any questions they want to ask, please do so. But the whole purpose of this is to highlight issues for either current or ongoing review and awareness, particularly for the Finance Department.
Thank you. So as a member of the working group, I think the main work we do is kind of as we go along, and we had everyone, all the lead members and the directors in to talk to us about their individual budgets. So we kind of pick things up as we go along, and it's cumulative and it is very thorough, and I think we're very grateful for your time, and I think it has, I hope it's helped you, but it certainly helped us to build up a picture of what is in the budget. So I don't know if any of the people who aren't in the working group have any questions to ask us. Well,
sorry, it's going parallel to what I was talking to Doug and Kim about, but recommendation 2, the Environment Select Committee continue its detailed scrutiny of carbon net zero and escalate any concerns to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. So as of 2 weeks ago, I was not in a position, after studying this in the committee for about 18 months, to understand whether the funding requirement for carbon net zero 2030 was 250, 150, 150, or it could be done within business as usual over a time. And it depends very much on the definitions. So one of the things we've done in our working group is for our next set of papers for the 2nd of February, which you're all welcome to come to, those who are not on the committee, is to focus fairly strongly and consistently in every paper on what we mean by those different definitions. And this has started to untangle some of the unknowns. But it is still a concern that A, we don't know the total size of the budget required, nor is there, quite understandably, the funding available. Now, whether you call this pipeline 2, 3, 4, or 1, or work programme, or business as usual, carrying out the project, there are all sorts of ways of slicing the cake. But it is true to say that as we are here today, that we do not have a fully funded 2030 net zero commitment. Kim's talked about the HRA area, but that's about 57% of the job of the council to achieve the 2030. And the rest of it is largely made up of other buildings. Things like transport and so on are usually done through change of vehicles within that period of time, so that's not going to be a problem. So that's the sort of business as usual. The large report, about 40% of the job will be done by the decarbonisation of the electricity grid. But there are other impediments that are being addressed. I mean, there's a school in north of the borough where up until recently they were having a problem in how they were going to deal with reducing their energy requirements in the future, because they were in a conservation area and they were not allowed to have double glazing. Now, with the way that Johnny Thalassites has got out a consultation for double glazing in conservation areas at the moment, that's being developed as a case study within that school, and there's a programme of improvements for that school going to be going through over the next year. So there's a lot of work going on, there are a lot of moving parts, but I just wanted to draw to the attention of this committee that there is still a large budgetary unknown in the area of the carbon net zero for 2030, and also to say that it's been flagged as on the risk register through the Audit and Transparency Committee as well, which I escalated in that direction.
Thank you, Will. And my very brief comment is, 'twas ever thus, even if in this case, only more so.
The officers who've been working on this have been working very hard, particularly over the last couple of weeks. And a big thank you to Taryn and her colleagues for updating and delving into detail on things. So there's a lot of progress being made. And I think that the job of achieving carbon net zero 2030 will be difficult, but not impossible, particularly if we are imaginative on the way we think about it.
No other questions? Okay, so we'll move on therefore to A8, which is the annual scrutiny work programme. And prepared for us by Jackie. So I think I'm going to skip along to the bit where we go to the next meeting. So we have this meeting's January the 24th. We have no meeting in February, and in the February meeting we are going to have the council plan update. No, we're also going to have, yes, the annual State of the Borough presentation with Barry and Elizabeth, the council plan update, a select committee work programme, forward plan of key decisions, the community safety plan, and I think we might also in that meeting have something in for Earls Court in that meeting as well. So I would say, looking at, in view of our discussion earlier, if we are to have another meeting with Thames Water, I think if we get them in, we would therefore have to have another single issue meeting. Do you think, Jackie? They're both looking, I'm just looking at the meetings before the election now, and they're both looking quite full.
Sorry, Chair. The pre-election period starts at the end of March,
yes.
So I don't think there would be any meetings during then.
Okay.
And it's whether the committee, as was suggested earlier in the discussion, would like to hear from Thames Water when they've concluded, when the independent review has concluded that's been set up. So it's whether that would be something.
I'm sure we'd like to hear from them when the review has concluded, but we might also want to hear from them before.
Yeah.
But looking at both of those meetings that are coming up in March,
so
they're both, I mean, they're too full to take an item on Thames Water, aren't they?
They are, but I'm not sure that you could have
a meeting during the pre-election period. I'd have to ask...
but when does it start, the pre-election?
End of March.
The end of March.
Yeah. And then, obviously, there's time...
If we want to have a meeting and invite Thames Water pre-election, it's a question of we have to find a free night in the chamber, don't we? It's not as simple as, because all the meetings still have to be in here. So, I mean, is it feasible that we could invite them in, I guess, February and the earlier pot to have another separate meeting?
We can ask them in, but then if you're having a working group, which you've discussed, it's whether, I suppose it's whether you want to go ahead with the working group or instead to work with those residents to ask, maybe have a one-off thing with those residents, a one-off meeting before Thames Water come in.
The thing is, I mean, I think we do want to go ahead with the working group. I also think getting I mean, they will try and resist and come after the report because they might not have anything. You know, we can say you don't reply to letters kind of thing in a meeting, but we won't get anything more substantive out of them than that until that report is actually produced. So I'm just really asking, or thinking out loud, I mean, I think it would be difficult to get a night where we could get them in, but do people feel we should be having Thames Water in this side of an election? Greg?
No, I do the public meeting off in June once the new council has assembled, and then there'll be something more substantive to get out of Thames Water at that stage.
I actually think, David, it would be very tricky for us to get a free night and actually get them to come along this side of the election. I think it would actually be quite hard.
I hear that. I absolutely accept that. I just think we ought to give it a try.
Okay, so you want to go ahead with it? Will?
What I was going to say is that are we not putting the cart before the horse? I would have thought that getting the first meet, David, I don't know whether you're, as chair, I would have thought getting getting the working group together relatively early is more a priority, because I think that trying to understand what the overall framework of the issues is, and then, if you like, structuring our role in that framework and the questions we want to ask of others about their role in the framework of what's going on. I mean, everything from the technology side to the customer relations side. So, you know,
I agree with getting it started is a matter of priority, and we want, and whether we're able to do it this month, I question, but we certainly want to do it in early February.
We have a budget for getting expertise and help. Could we not use it? You know, Jackie, like we can't afford a hydrologist, but we have got a pot of money that we haven't used.
Yeah, we have a pot of money that Scrutiny can use to get independent experts in to assist. So I think when the working group terms of reference have been scoped out and you know what you're doing, where the focus is going to be, then look at it as part of that, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, there is some money there.
If we were to ask a hydrologist to design a water sewage system for London, it would cost millions. But if we ask a hydrologist to set out a sort of mental map of what that system looks like and who might do which bits of the working parts of that, it's an hour's lecture, if you like.
Yeah, but I mean, we could sort of ask what you said earlier. We get an expert to explain it to us,
exactly,
so that we can get our heads around it. And all I'm saying is that there is a budget that we haven't utilised, which we would be able to utilise. That's what I'm saying.
Can I just make a request that any councillor here who wants to make comments, even if they don't necessarily want to be on the committee, and you've made a number, Will, of suggestions, if you can email through to me and maybe copy Jackie, that would be really helpful.
Yep.
So that we can start to amalgamate that and then distribute that to those members of our residents who want to come along.
Um, Thank you. Yes, Chair. I think the next meeting should be concentrating the working group, not as OSC meeting. And I think the working group should take the lead from now onwards and should find the time and the dates that can fit in for their own time rather than an OSC meeting. That's my number one suggestion. And if we were to use the budget that we have as an expert to call in to give us, that's also an idea that I would support. So yeah, good. Rather than us having a meeting, it should be the working group leading the meeting from now onwards.
I mean, David is going to be the chair, so it's up to him, but I think as these working groups go, it's going to take a lot of time, so it's, you know, join it if you've got the time to give it. But besides that, I would welcome everyone to join it, but I think it will be probably a significant amount of time if we're going to do it, if David's going to do it properly. Yeah?
Definitely. We'll give David all the support.
Okay, so we're all agreed on that one. Okay. So moving on. Moving on to the key decisions. Does anyone have any key decisions that they would like to? Greg.
Thank you, MT. There was a different point I wanted to make on on the previous item, but I'll do it very briefly.
Sorry.
The recommendations tracker, which is very good. Now let me see where it is. I think it needs another column. It's all very well for the leadership team to accept the recommendations, but I think we need another column to say whether they've actually done them.
I think implemented. I think we have to have the last
We
column.
do. We have to have the outcome, and I think that's something we need to be following up, and perhaps Jackie can take a note of that. It's obviously much better system we previously had, but needs more development.
It does need more development, and I am following that up. So I think most of you are on the select committees, and we have the select committee chairs here. So the detail is at the select committee, so that's why I tried to put some of the links into the recommendation tracker, because I couldn't get all the information onto the A4 that you could actually read it. So that is a piece of work that I'm doing for the report that I will bring to the last meeting of this committee, following up on the implementation. So it's definitely in hand. I'm working on it.
Great. Yeah. Thank you very much, Jackie. That's really helpful. And then you had called us on to A9, so I do have a couple on. I did. I had a couple for the HCSC to put forward, which I thought I'd already done, but actually I think it might have been I had them ready for the meeting when I went sick, or the meeting that was cancelled. So they're not paginated, so 3 pages from the back, the TA acquisition programme strategy at the bottom, I think would be useful for HSC to do. And I can point them out to Jackie afterwards if she's struggling to find them. And then a further page back from that, the Latimer community acquisition of the Latimer Community Church in Bramley Road, just to be consistent with what we're doing with the New Homes programme, as that's an important part of it. I think that should be on the list for scrutiny as we're scrutinising the other acquisitions. And I'll point them out to Jackie in a hard copy just to make sure she's got them.
Again, we have an ongoing issue in terms of the key decisions taking in between scrutiny. For example, there will be a key decision coming up for temporary recommendation and the strategy, and that will be taken before we actually have a meeting on temporary recommendations in March. I can understand we can accommodate. However, there was a key decision that we called in last month, 13th of December, and that key decision is about setting up a company, a holding company for the New Homes program. We've asked for the details to be provided on the 31st of this month so that we can look at it back again. That has been delayed, and I was informed earlier by the officers that the decision will be taken in February, and that is after we've made the meeting and before we have the March meeting. So again, we're struggling to accommodate, to work in collaboration with the leadership to make decisions and give us the time scrutiny requires. It's an ongoing issue, and I think we should, I'll write to you personally about this, and perhaps we can look into the further details to work together with the leadership and the scrutiny so that we can make the decisions and scrutinize. The leadership can make the decisions, but we can scrutinize well in time, not just in between scrutiny meetings and leadership decisions.
Yeah, I think I wasn't at that point in the meeting. I had to leave, but there's always a problem in things falling between the meetings. It's a difficulty, and however many meetings we had, you could still get that coming up as a potential problem. So I think in those circumstances, and maybe Jackie will help me out here, is that we do it by email, we make past comments by email.
Yeah, I think there's two key, sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you. There's two key decisions for this project. So one was October, November on setting up the company, and there's a second key decision which Councillor Ali is referring to that's going to leadership team on the 1st of February, and my understanding is that that's, sorry, the 9th of February, my understanding is that that's about setting up a committee, a small committee of lead members in relation to the shareholding company. I think there's, sorry, on the company, but my understanding is there's more work to be done around this project, so something much more detailed could come to the committee possibly in March if that's helpful. And I can talk to officers about that if that helps you with what you want to do, Councillor. And sometimes the key decisions do fall between meetings. So the options are that you could either give comments by email, or we could ask officers to give you a briefing, to meet with the committee to give you a briefing, and then you can draft we would work with you to draft a reference report for that 9th of February leadership team, giving your comments.
If you allow me, Madam Chair, I think, yes, that's correct. However, when it comes to the key decision making of temporary recommendation, we've accepted to do by email. That's absolutely fine. We do have to have email circulation to meet and to give some feedbacks. Having said that, when we have a key decision that we've already referred to back to the select committee and we need more details about it, and then instead of giving us the details that we've requested a month later, but then again was told that the details may not, or information will not be available, but then again key decision will be made in between scrutiny. That is what prompted me to ask a question about this. So yes, we cannot ask select committee members all the time to have by email to look into it. What we have already requested at the meeting, so I would appreciate, very much appreciate, if we can have a key decision or information or briefing by email where we've requested it, that's fine. If not, at the meeting, we have a select committee meeting on the 31st of this month. If the information isn't already, then the key decision, the decision to be taken in the 9th of February will be an open case decision making, so that we can always continue to improve and scrutinize when we have that information to scrutinize, rather than making a done deal and decision is being made, nothing we can do about it. If the leadership decides to make a decision, well, that's fine, they can do the decision. But as a scrutiny committee, we've asked it for this information. It's not being provided on time. We want to have that information in hand, and the decision to be made will be a decision that can be flexible, and the input from the select committee can be taken on board when we have the information to look into it. That's the point that I'm trying to make.
So, I mean, Kazim, you should have that information as soon as it's available. You should get it. And I know certainly when I had the urgent key decisions, I always got a report. I mean, I might only have a few hours to read it or whatever, but there's only one occasion when I didn't have a report and I kicked up a fuss, and it should come through. And I don't know, I think, if Jackie, if you could chase that, because that's not right.
Yeah, I think Dan Hawthorne is the lead officer for that, so I will make a note and I'll speak to him tomorrow. Yeah.
Thank you, Jackie. If you could do that, we'll
yeah, I'll
appreciate
definitely
that.
do that.
I have already discussion with officers working with me at the Housing and Communities, and we've had this conversation before. Probably they will also reach out to you. So appreciate that. Looking forward to hearing from you.
So does anyone else want to pick up our key decision? No? Okay, so I will then move on to the minutes, which I'm sure you've all read, and will you like me to sign them as a faithful representation of what happened? Okay, I will sign. So I would like to thank you all for coming tonight and thank all the officers, and say one last thing. This will be Martin Carver's last OSC meeting. So I would like everyone to say a really big thank you to him.
Thank you for everything.
Thank you, Martin.